Hello everyone, Tibbs316 here. Oh, did I start too early? Hello everyone, Tibbs316 here, and this is my next Iron Maiden review of their 6th studio album, the album that came out the year I was born, 1986, Somewhere in Time. Now in the last review, I reviewed Power Slave, the legendary 1984 album that many feel is the peak of Maiden, at least during the 80s. So from this point on, a lot of casual metal fans might not know any more of them throughout the 80s, but they were just as great in the late 80s as they were in the early 80s, even better, some people might say. Between Power Slave and Somewhere in Time, they came out with their first big live album, Live After Death. Fantastic, and I will actually take a look at a lot of the live albums, compilations, stuff like that, and I'll give them their own separate video. This series is just focusing on the studio albums themselves. This album, it kind of musically has a different tact here. It's got a futuristic quality to it, kind of a Blade Runner-like cover. I mean, look right behind me. It's up on the wall, the entire thing, front to back. One of the most spectacular sleeves of any album you'll ever see. It's got so many references to it, to other Maiden stuff, to Ray Bradbury. It's got all, oh my, there's so, I think there's even some Rod Serling Twilight Zone references in there. There's so much stuff. It is one of the most brilliant covers ever done. It was all hand done as far as I know. It's not like today where everything's done in a computer. It's all hand drawn. I could make a whole video just on that cover. In fact, someday I might. You got Eddie there, look like a cyborg, and the boys literally right above my head in the frame, if you can see. You got the pyramid in the background. There's so much stuff. The album itself is kick-ass, but it does have some changes from previous Maiden. During the World Slavery Tour, they played they got asked to play at a wedding in Poland, and they did. They played "Smoke on the Water." They played a couple of songs. There's actual footage of it. It's pretty cool. And there's this classic clip. Every Maiden fan has seen this clip of this young Polish kid going, "I'd like to play heavy metal with synthesizers," and Bruce going, "Oh, you can't play heavy metal with synthesizers." Well, 1 year later, they would try to do that. I think Steve on this album, he has a synth bass, and this is also when they started using not samples, but like a synth keyboard in the background. I think Mike Kinney, Steve's bass technician, is the one that would do it. He's the one that does it now, especially live. Like they'll play on stage, and the stuff that they can't recreate with their own instruments, the orchestral simulation of a keyboard or whatever, he'll do backstage. And that kind of started with this album. It's interesting because this album, it doesn't really have a theme going through it. It doesn't really have a futuristic theme to it, but the sound of the songs is very futuristic. And the tour, I don't know if you can see it on the back of the CD. That's what Eddie looked like on tour. It's pretty cool. His head was like, I think, matter of fact, yeah, you can even see Nico's drum kit on the back. I think his head would rise up, and Nico would go up to the heavens, and his hands would come up, and all that stuff. They'd be inflatable. Apparently, one night, a little fire burst one of his hands, and he was just sticking the finger up, which is so cool. They should have kept it like that. But enough about all the fringe things, the songs. You got Caught Somewhere in Time, which perfectly encapsulates the album, both lyrically and musically. I mean, right off the bat, the way the guitar sounds, that opening lick, it just sounds so different. It's still great, but it sounds incredibly different. It sounds like they're 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 I don't say encroaching on new territory, but they're trying something different, and that is a wonderful thing. Because no one, this goes in. I'm sure there are a lot of Maiden fans that don't like this album and the one following it, because it's different. But that's the thing. Who wants to play the exact same chords all their lives? Who wants to play the exact same instruments all their lives? I mean, they do. I mean, granted, they still do. But you gotta expand your horizons. Maiden's always been borderline progressive, and this album and Seventh Son, which will be the next review, always push the limits of their own technology, push the limits of their own imagination, and it's just more fun for the rest of us. And Caught Somewhere in Time, I think it's based on a Ray Bradbury story. Lyrically, it might be, the title might be. I believe he wrote something called Somewhere in Time. I know there's a movie called Somewhere in Time as well. It's completely unrelated. But the lyrics, it still chugs. It still has that jig, 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 jig. It still has that chugginess about it that Maiden fans love. They'll never lose that. I mean, as much as they like to be progressive and melodic, they'll never lose that driving force that makes them who they are. Then, Wasted Years, which is the big single, that's the song that most people know from this album. You know, the idea of living your life and to the fullest and, you know, looking back on it. And it's got a great music video. I haven't seen it in a long time, but I think it was one of the first music videos that, was it the one where Bruce had, it might have just been on tour. He had that suit that was like futuristic and like he had like veins on it that lit up and a heart. It only lasted for 5 seconds because the juice didn't last long. But it's a fantastic song. It's one of Adrian's best songs in terms of, because he wrote a lot of the, like I think he wrote the opening for it and the solo. It's absolutely incredible. It's one of the few Maiden songs where I think he does backup vocals. And when they would do it live, he and Bruce would go back and forth with the chorus part, you know, the wasted years. It's awesome. And it was one of the first songs of theirs that I kind of latched onto. Because before I bought any of their albums, I bought a compilation of their best songs up until that point. And Wasted Years, it touched me. The lyrics are pretty deep. I think anyone can understand it. That's probably why it was a hit. And then you got Sea of Madness, which, if you love the driving, chugging, fast-paced Maiden, Sea of Madness is awesome. It's got some brilliant tom rolls, some brilliant drum work by Nico, as is his way. It's awesome. I mean, every song on all these 80s albums are so fantastic that I'm probably just going down the same road by saying the same things. But Sea of Madness, it also has a breakdown in it that's really good. You know, Bruce's vocals, his voice, that thick English accent that he has to this day is one of my favorite voices in history. You know, the English always seem to do it just a little bit better, and they're no exception. And then comes what may be my favorite song on the album. It's definitely the song I think of the first song I think of when I think of this album, Heaven Can Wait. This song is a song, again, I think anyone can relate to. It's a song about a nightmare and not knowing like whether the nightmare is real, not knowing if what you're witnessing is real. Are you heading towards your own demise or not? It's very scary. It's one of those songs that you ever wake up in the middle of the night and you're half asleep and the room's kind of hazy and you can kind of move around, but you can't speak. That's kind of how this song makes me feel. And one night I think when I was in one of those states, I actually thought of this song. It was really creepy. And the guitar solo towards the back end of this song, without a doubt, is, if I had to encapsulate one guitar solo that was scary and that was the stuff of nightmares, not because it's bad, but just the tone, the vibe, and the sound, it would be one of the guitar solos in this song. And if you know this song very well like I do, you know exactly which song I'm talking about, now which solo I'm talking about. And also that part where they go, whoa, whoa. It's one of the first time Maiden would actually do something like that, where they don't really say lyrics, just kind of intentionally in the song plant the seeds for a future crowd interaction. But it's so good. I find myself doing it whenever I hear the song. In fact, when they were on the Somewhere Back in Time tour several years ago, they actually, I forget what town they were in when they played that song on the DVD, but they actually had like a whole soccer team come up on stage with them. It was very cool. Then The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner. It's pretty much what it is. The loneliness of someone. I don't think it's literal, some like a track runner, but when I hear that opening guitar riff, dun, 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 I picture someone in slow motion, just kind of jogging along or getting ready for a big race. And then when it really kicks in with that, they take off full force. And I actually know someone I know a couple people who are track runners, and I kind of think of them when I hear that song. Not that they're lonely people, but it just, I don't know, it paints a picture in my mind with the title, the lyrics, the sadness and the melancholy, or as Pokey Girl 2017 would say, the melancholy. That's one of her words that she invented of the music. Just it paints an image in your head, and I think that's the best thing that any song can do. Whether you understand the lyrics or not, it makes you feel something. It's Stranger in a Strange Land, which I think was the other single released from this, and it is also based on a science fiction tale about an alien. I think, I don't know, it was a Martian or someone, or maybe a robot. Is it her? Oh no, actually, I think what it is it's someone, maybe an astronaut who left and then returns to Earth 100 years later. So, the idea of anyone being in a place they don't recognize or don't understand. Again, but it's definitely inspired by that science fiction tale. If any one of you out there know that tale, you can please feel free to enlighten me. Awesome song, you know. It's got a great bass line, you know. It's awesome. It's classic heavy metal. It's not full force, you know, 1,000 miles an hour, but it's chugging. It's got a good riff to it. Bruce's vocals are spot on. It's got intriguing lyrics. It might be the best song on the album in terms of encapsulating the whole feeling of the album, that kind of futuristic type quality to it. And it's the first Maiden song, and the only one off the top of my head I could think of that has, I know there's a term for it, when the song doesn't have a definitive conclusion, when it slowly drains out, gets quieter and quieter until eventually it's gone. I know there's a term for that. It's the first, definitely the first, I think the only Maiden song where they ever did that, which makes it a unique song for sure. Of course, live they would have a definitive ending, but on the album it just kind of fades out. And I know that's on purpose. There's a reason for that. And then Deja Vu. There's not really too much to say about this one. It's the idea, we all know what deja vu is, and in case you don't, the idea that you're experiencing something that has already happened. Or you get a feeling in your head, you know what's going to happen next because you've experienced this moment before. That's what the whole song's about. So maybe there is a lot to say about it. And it goes into various examples of that, but it's kind of a creepy feeling because a lot of people think that's a sign that we get reincarnated, that we've lived again, that's another dimension. Who knows, right? Who knows? But very intriguing nonetheless. And then the last song on the album, it's become a Maiden tradition at this point to put their most epic song at the very end. No different here. Alexander the Great. And yes, this song is based on the Macedon king himself, the legendary figure in history, one of the most intriguing figures in history. Can't say I know a whole lot about him, but if you don't, this song, which I think this song is pretty accurate from what I understand, I did kind of look up some facts when I had the lyric book next to me to see if things matched up, and they did pretty well. It basically just tells his life, how he was destined to become the king, how he died in Babylon of fever, which I think is disputed, but that's what they go with in the song. And it has one of the best openings. It starts with the wind, and you hear a voice go, "My son, ask for thyself another kingdom, for that which I leave is too small for thee." Dun, dun, dun. It's got such... It builds it up and builds it up and builds up until finally, burn, it's so good. And the way it ends, it is truly an epic. Coming off of Rime of the Ancient Mariner on the previous album, I can see why not a lot of people remember this piece. But for me, it is one of their most underrated. It's probably the most underrated of all their epic pieces. I guess you would consider an epic piece any song that goes over 8 minutes. Maybe it's the subject matter, what have you. But if you're a big history buff, especially with that stuff, or you just love, a lot of metal bands tend to focus on historical figures because it's such a fantastic time, in history to romanticize, to talk about, and this is no exception. And that is Somewhere in Time, a fantastic album to be sure. Now, Maiden at this point, they were going through a transitional period. Bruce... I know they were starting to get really... They had another huge tour after this. They were really starting to get worn down at this point. Cracks really didn't start to form till the following year, and we will get into that in the next review. But you wouldn't know it, because their music is so good. It's like no matter how they were feeling outside, when they get in the studio and start recording, that was all they needed. It was their rock. It's what kept them going. Their music is what kept me going. I was a very lonely person for a long time, and their music was one of the things that really made me feel something, and introduced me to the world of heavy metal, which may be my favorite musical genre of all time now. Well, up next, we will do Seventh Son of a Seventh Son to round out the 80s and talk about the cracks that formed in Adrian's departure. But that is next time. I'm Tibbs316. Thank you once again for joining me on another classic Iron Maiden review. And yes, I am doing them all. I'm even going to do the 90s, even though to some people Maiden didn't even exist in the 90s, both Maiden fans and non-Maiden fans. But we're going to do it all. We're going to do it all, and we're going to do it all justice. At least it's the best that I can do. So, thanks everyone for joining me, and I will see you next time. Up the irons!